Okay, so now we've got our model, we've got our handle, and we've modeled a transition from the main section into the handle, and we've also done the same thing with a basic block out of the trigger. What I'll do now is combine these two layers together to weld these different areas together. So you can see here that if I turn that off, you can see this large hole here where the handle fits. So here, before I do that, if I wanted to preserve part of this model, let's say for example I wanted to preserve the handle geometry as it is before I progress, then I can do that quite easily. So I'll select the handle here, and if I go down to my Poly Models window here, if you don't see that, you can go up to the Windows panels and go down to Poly Models, and I'm going to drop the handle geometry into this folder to preserve its initial state that I have it here. So to do that, all I'm going to do is just hover over the end of this layer here, where you can see this arrow, left click and drag that into this new folder. And there you can see I've preserved the model in its state as it was. Now I can go ahead and do the same thing, but this time I'm going to take this handle layer and move it on the top of the main layer, and this will effectively combine these two meshes together. So I'll click and hold and then drop that layer onto the main layer, and you can see now that the colors being represented are uniform, meaning that that has now been unified as a mesh. This will help me now to progress to the next stage. So with that done, let's now go back to our reference image here using the color palette tab, and I've just opened up my reference images here, which I will show by clicking this button here, and I will just pin that down just so we can see the actual trigger image here where we want to actually build this trigger into it. Now I'm going to start to make this on a separate layer just for now, but before I do that I need to make a space for that actual trigger to be placed. So I'll use my delete polygons tool here, and I will just remove a couple of these here just to make space for that trigger to go into. And with that done, I'm going to add a new layer now. Just leave it at the name Polygroup 1, and I'll need to make this geometry in here. So again, back to the Points to Polys tool here, and what I can do here is, because I've got nothing to reference, so here if I use my on plane that you can see there, you can normally I can reference a plane with this where I want to work on, but there's no geometry here for me to do that. The only geometry I have is possibly this plane here that I could use as a starting point, and then I'll move it over. So I'll do that now. I will right click onto this plane here, and I'll start to just position some points down, click to make a poly. So now you can see this is roughly on the same plane as that initial polygon that I clicked on, but I don't want it there, I want it further back. So I'll click on my Faces tool, select that polygon, and with my transform, move to the front view. I'm just going to move this back roughly into this sort of location here, because the polygons were deleted from this row here of polys. So that basically moves that trigger backwards. Move it back a little bit more. So now I have my starting reference point. Let's go back to the Points to Polys. I can now right click on this polygon because it's in the right location, and I'll just reduce the size of that plane there down and zoom in, and I can just continue now and place my points down on that correct plane. And I'll go all the way to the top here. I'll just turn off this main layer for now and place those in. So I'm right clicking now on that point just to move it into that space that I created earlier, and just to make a little bit more shape. Okay, so with that done, what I'll do now is I'll just split this down the middle. So we use our split rings. I'll hold Shift and click to place a split down the middle. Let's bring back the main section here. And of course, it's only a single plane at the moment, so now I need to extrude this out to roughly the center line here. To do that, let me just drop that selection. I'll use my Edges tool here and click to select all those edges around. I don't actually need the top ones there, so I'll just control click to deselect those. And now I'll use my extrude. I'll just use the basic one. Commit extrusion, and now I will pull those those edges back to that center line. So now I've got my basic trigger blocked in. Let's bring back the main section there, and you can see it's fitting into that gap there. It's probably a little bit tight, there's a little bit of clipping going on there, so I'll just move those edges forwards a little bit there. Bring it back. There we go. So very quickly now, what I want to do is this original gap that I left for my trigger to be placed in, I just want to cap that off. As you can see, I just deleted those polygons but actually didn't cap this. So let's hide this one here and go back to the main and select these edges here, and this time I will just do a quick extrusion, commit extrusion on there, and I will just pull these back, something like that. So it gives me that little cavity there. We will never see inside that cavity, but I just wanted to make sure that I got at least some polygons in there. We need to remove these polygons as well, so I'll use my delete polygons tool here and just delete these inner polys here, because this is going to be mirrored, so we don't actually need those. Okay, so now, as you might have guessed, what I want to do is to mirror this side over. Now I know this is going to be, we're going to have a small problem with this because the thickness of this handle here will effectively be doubled. So the handle and the trigger geometry will be very thick for this unit. So we'll have to do some further editing on this, but let's go ahead and see what it looks like. So with this object selected here, I'm not going to choose the actual trigger object. That's just my block in at the moment. But with my main selection being the main polygroup here, I'm going to hit S on the keyboard and enable symmetry. And then I'm going to go to Mesh and Virtual Mirror. And as you can see with this virtual mirror, let me just turn off my reference for now. So what I'll do now is I will go to Mesh and I will say apply the symmetry to the current layer, which is called Main, and then disable Virtual Mirror. So now I've got real geometry and we can see clearly now what our issue is. So what I can do now is use a relatively new feature inside of 3DCoat, which is the soft selection, and make this a little bit more organic in its appearance. At the moment, it's just essentially a huge block of polygons that has no shape or form. It has a form from this angle, but once we turn around, we can see it's just an essentially cut out big block. And we need to shape it a little bit more and mold it so that it looks and feels like something somebody could hold. So with the object now fully mirrored over and my symmetry on X still active, whatever I do to one side of the mesh now is going to work on the other side as well. So you can see here I've got this brush tool and I'm able to move equally on both sides. Let me undo that. So now I can bring in a little bit more of an organic approach to this handle to make it look a little bit less blocky and more something that would fit in somebody's hand. So not only the brush tool helps me to do this, but the soft selection. So let's look at the soft selection first, and we'll hit select on here and make sure my points is selected, and I'm going to snap to the front view, just reduce my brush size down, and I'm going to choose the rectangular marquee like so, and then I will just click and drag and select a bunch of vertices. Now if I was to use the transform tool, so I'll click on transform, hold shift down to move the gizmo to the center line, and then use this scale option to scale these in, you'll see it destroys really the work that we did before, because it's just doing it on a one-to-one. There's no soft selection on this at all. So let me undo that, and this time with the same selection I'm going to hit this option down here called smooth selection. So once I've hit smooth selection on there, it's going to just feather the selection and just start to introduce other vertices into that selection. So now again, if I use this scale and move inwards, you can see that effect is a lot less harsh, and now I'm able to bring this in and maintain more of that curvature on my selection. One of the things I'm going to do now is to actually relax some of this geometry as I progress. So I'm not too concerned at the moment if things aren't looking too good in terms of the transition anymore, because I'm going to ultimately relax this geometry with the brush tool. But for now, all I'm interested in is just getting this handle to be a little bit narrower than it was before, and I'm happy with that. So let's continue, and I'm going to use my edge selection here, and I'm just going to click on these edges here and convert that to a point selection. And now with this point selection, I'm going to click on this button here called expand, which is going to expand that selection outwards. Now if I use my transform tool again here and pull these ones out, you can see I get that really ugly transition going on. So let's undo that, keep the selection as it was, but now hit smooth select. And now let's use this again and just pull these ones out here. And this now gives me a much smoother, more uniform result. So I'll drop the selection. You can see now that we're starting to get a little bit more of an organic type design in here. There are still some issues, which are like these vertices here, which we know we could use the slide vertex tool here if we wanted to just even these out a little bit. Something like that. But generally we are now going to start to shape and model this handle a little bit more. So let's continue, and I'll go back to my select tool here and I will choose edges again, and I'll choose these edges here. Probably just deselect those ones and expand. Expand again. And then you can always just deselect ones, which something like that, and then I'll go to smooth on there just to smooth that out, and use my transform tool here. Shift to place this roughly in the center where I want it to transform from, and then I can start to pull this one out. Let's drop that selection, and let's try something on the middle section here. Again, back to my, so the reason I'm going to my edges first is because I can then very easily, let me just drop that tool. I can very easily select an edge, loop all the way around. Same on this side here, so I'm going to select these ones here all the way around there, then convert that to a selection, and then use my soft smooth selection on there. I'll just increase that one there. Back to my transform. Now you can also invert the selection should you want to do anything outside of that selection. And as you can see here, everything else got selected, but those initial ones that we chose. So I don't want to really manipulate these ones at the top. So I can go to Control and drag this out so I don't affect those ones. Maybe I want to affect the bottom ones even more. So let's just deselect a little bit higher there. And now I can come into here and maybe just start to move these ones out a little bit more. Now I start to get a much better shape on that handle. Because the reference has this indication that something's attached to this handle, that's one of the reasons why I'm just making this a little bit more blocky and as if something needs to fit in there. So let's drop that selection there. You can see now that we're starting to shape a little bit more our handle. So let's do one last thing here. Let's just pull these ones in a little bit more. Transform, Shift, move the gizmo to the center, and just move these ones inwards, just to make that trigger just a little bit narrower. Oops, I selected an extra point there. Let's just check around. Now that's okay, but I have pinched these polygons here. They're not quite as even as they were. I could do a quick vertex slide on here just to pull these ones over. Okay, so we've just evened those ones up now, but now I'm getting something that has a much thinner trigger area here, and I'm modeling the inner handles, the handle shape as well. And I still need to refine this a little bit more and smooth it off so that we're getting more like the effect that we're getting on the reference here, which is more of a rounded than a blocky handle like we have here. So now I'm going to look at using the brush tool now, and we're going to try to emulate this roundness of this handle with the geometry that we've got. So with the brush tool selected here, we've got a couple of things that we need to look at. So first of all, you can see here that I have my radius, which if I click my right mouse button, I can increase and decrease the size of that. If I hold down Shift, then this is going into smoothing mode, and this green line that you can see in the middle of the circle is the intensity. So if I roll the middle mouse button up and down, you can see I can increase and decrease the intensity of the smoothing action. So with that in mind, I'm going to be using the brush tool itself to pull elements in and out and push them in and out, and then I'll smooth that over with the Shift held down. And not forgetting, of course, that I have my symmetry active as well, so I'll be working on both sides. So let's make a start on this. So we can see here that we've got very rounded corners, not the sharp beveled corners that we've got here. I'll reduce the size of the brush, hit Shift, and then just start to brush very slightly on here. So if I right click and make this larger, and then similar to the vertex that we were selecting before, the brush size is kind of like a fall off zone, and it's a natural soft selection. So here, for example, I can just pull these out, and if I increase the size, then I'm going to be pulling more of this geometry out, as you can see here. So I'm making very subtle edits to it, and then brushing over to smooth that down again. So effectively I'm sculpting this as well, and it's important to understand within 3DCoat modeling workspace that we're not just limited to these tools where we're working at a polygon and edge and vertex level. We can sculpt this and we can shape this, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's all part of the process. The main thing is to get a nice clean geometry and also the shapes that you are looking for. In having the good topology is always going to be of benefit to you when doing this kind of editing. So whenever I make a change to the geometry, then I'll always smooth out that change with a varied amount of intensity. So now we've got a much better looking model here in terms of the shape of that handle, much more organic feel to it. And if we just move over to here, we can always move back to our select tool . So just moving between the two versions, soft select and the brush tool, gives us that ability to really just make those subtle tweaks to the geometry, which just give it that sort of more molded look to it. That and escape. Let's go back to that brush tool. Now I don't want to go up into this region because I want this to be a different kind of feel, a form that's solid and has a definite structure to it. But it moves down into this handle, and this handle becomes a different form, an organic form. So that's the transition I'm trying to look for here. So my intensity is very low on this, but it's just doing enough just to move and massage those polygons. So as you can see, we've successfully made those nice shapes and curves without using any of the modeling tools here, but just this brush and our soft selection, just moving these out into a general position and then smoothing those out as we go. So I'll just try to bring the handle out a little bit more just on here. It just feels as if it needs a little bit more. So let's move back to the slide vertex tool now. Find my slide vertex. So I just want to make sure that this doesn't have a kink in it, which is got there, just to straighten this out a little bit more. And this one here just lost that edge. The last thing I'll do actually is just to look at this edge on here. It's a little bit harsh, so I'll go over to my edge tool here, hold shift. Just go to my bevel tool, and I'll use the bevel size here. Just reduce that down. I'll use the old variant. Let's just smooth that transition out a little bit more. And if I want to just reduce this one down, This one's a little bit more tricky to do because that's going to give me some extra faces which are going to run through here, which I don't want. So I'll use my edge tool with move. And I'll just go back to my slide vertex tool here and just to move that around. Okay, that's better. Okay, so to finish this section off, let's go back to the trigger object here, and I'll just hide the main object for now. So that trigger looks fine. So what we'll do is just mirror this over. So let's make sure my mirror is on, and I'll go to my virtual mirror again, and as I expected, it's far too wide. So let's reduce that down. So with the mirror still on, I'll select these faces here and just move them over. And use my transform, and I'm just going to slide them over this direction. And escape, drop the tool, and now I can commit this mirror over to my layer by going to Mesh, Apply Symmetry to Current Layer, and then don't forget to turn off the virtual mirror. Let's bring back our object here, and we can see that trigger in there. Fill in this gap here, let's probably move this over, so back to my transform. Effectively just tapering this a little bit more here. And of course, if we want to just soften the whole trigger, then we can just go into here and put a bevel on these edges. Loops there, and hit the bevel. Just reduce that down. Very subtle, but it does help to just catch the light, and just say OK on that. There is just one more little tweak that I could do here, and that is this highlight that we get in on here. We can see that it's going down, and I could just tweak these verts here a little bit just to sort of get that feeling that that was moving in that direction. So I could, for example, come over to here. I've got quite a large space here, and just move these down. And then just use that brush tool again, very low intensity, and just relax the changes that you've made, which is just going to even out those polygons. And we can take the trigger and move that into the main layer as well. Now the trigger is a separate object, which is why it's been colorized differently than the main. It's not actually attached to the main part of the prop. Next time we will continue with the front. In the next video we will connect the nozzle to the front part here, and we will also add some more details to finalize the model. See you next time.